decades now, I've been sitting in my office asking people, tell me your story. And that's powerful. It's also healing because now they're not alone with an experience that they felt alone with before. My parents looked at each other and said, we can't raise our kids in an environment that will never give our children an opportunity to exemplify themselves.
Barometer, what litmus test can we all do on our own and say, hey, I have empathy, I don't have empathy.
Even when we're not actually angry, we're not feeling the emotions right now, but there's some element of, I'm not being heard.
You don't have to be full-on empathic 24/7. It's not sustainable, it's not healthy, and you have to practice, wait for it, self-empathy.
There's self-empathy, and then is it different than self-love? What does ballet, pizza, empathy, and medicine, what do they all have in common?
Last Saturday for me. It was literally last Saturday. The medicine part, my wife was at a conference in Orlando speaking to the American Academy of Pediatrics. I took my daughter to ballet. She did not want to go to ballet, so I needed to have a lot of empathy, and we ended up with pizza instead of ballet. Day in the life of a 3-year-old girl dad. What did you have in mind?
I had something really different in mind, but I love that you were able to pull from real life. Sanvi, congratulations. You made your dad's empathy muscle work a little bit. I am so excited about today's guest because this guy is all of these things and so much more. On the show with us on Happy and Human today, listeners, please welcome Dr. Ashok Bhattacharya. Hello. Tell us where you're joining from.
I'm just outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
We connected on LinkedIn. Your posts just grabbed me from the moment I laid eyes on them. And I wanted to bring you on the show because you have such a, again, unique perspective. And every time you open your mouth and you share something about your life, I'm blown away and drawn in even more at the same time, if that's possible. The reason that I really was floored is because we talk about, there's words that we hear all the time, right? We hear about breath work, we hear about yoga, and you don't really talk about that stuff, but you do talk about something called empathy. So much. I feel like every time I turn around, we're talking about empathy now and compassion and self-love. But you are one of the OGs back when it wasn't popular. And in fact, it was quite, to use words that my son would use, it was cringe. Tell us about that.
I've always been thinking since I was a child, what is it like to experience the experience of someone or something else? How do other people experience their experiences? My limit is my sense of myself. And pure empathy, pure accurate empathy requires you to get off the screen completely of yourself to enter the perspective of somebody else. And the simplest examples is the sound of our voice. We're all speaking, we're all listening, but my voice sounds to me the way it sounds because it's happening through air, but it's also happening through my body.
Yeah.
And if I put my fingers on my ears, I can still hear my voice, but I can't hear your voice. And when we listen to the playback of this, I'll say, oh, I don't sound like that at all. Mm-hmm. So empathy is trying to listen to how someone's voice sounds to them, not to you. There's something extra in there, and that's their inner self. And I've been fixated on this question really ever since I was a child.
Why?
I think when I started out in life, it was complex. I was born in England in a very complex time. India had just gotten its independence from England, and a lot of people went to England to get educations, including my father. He was there in the early 50s. Met me mum, who was a Londoner, and they got married. And then they had us. And when we entered the British school system, we were not liked, not one bit. And I have a twin brother who's a genius, and both of us were diagnosed as retarded in England in the 60s. And I had other siblings too. So my parents looked at each other and said, we can't raise our kids in an environment that will never give our children an opportunity to exemplify themselves either artistically or intellectually or physically or spiritually. So they made the amazing decision to come to Newfoundland, Canada. And when we came to Canada, which is a much more open community, where there interestingly were lots of other Asian people there too, especially in Newfoundland, trying to find a way to move forward with a way that they can find their freedom the freedom to be who they are as a person. And in short order, we hit the schools, we got into university, I got into med school and became a psychiatrist. My brother's a world famous geologist. My sister's a doctor, and my other brother's a lawyer. So we did okay. None of that would have happened had we not come. So I think about, did they see me, or did they see who they thought I was, and therefore I was typecast and not given an opportunity?
Yeah.
And I think that concept of, can people see the fullness, the totality of who somebody else is, including their future potential, then we can maybe in a much better position to not just help that person, but save that person. That's the why.
Yeah. So I think we're at a time as a society where we understand why this is important across many spheres of our life: professional, personal, parenting, relationships, things like that. But I'll generalize here. I have yet to meet a person who acknowledges, either outwardly or inwardly, that they are bad at empathy. They're an unempathetic person, right? Instead, what we oftentimes hear is like, someone will give you the advice or shared advice that you need to have more compassion. You need to have more empathy. You need to be more understanding. And to me, this advice is a little bit like a parent telling a child to focus. We don't know what focus is. We've never been taught how to focus, but we can quickly identify that you're lacking focus and what you need is more focus. How would you, and from your experience and all the work you've done, what barometer, what litmus test can we all do on our own and say, hey, I have empathy, I don't have empathy, or what can I do to learn how to have empathy and be empathetic?
Great question to ask. So for me, it comes down to using our senses. And the easiest one to describe is listening. And if you can't listen to somebody, and what happens when you're listening to somebody is you have to stop your inner voice from chattering. Oh, I could say this, oh, I'll ask them this. That's going on in our minds. But when someone is speaking, if you can just put that off the screen and fully take in what that person is saying. And what I do is, when someone's describing something to me, is I start to make a movie of what they're saying. And I'm seeing sets, I'm seeing colors, a cast, and I'm starting to see that image of what they're saying. So in order to be able to do that, I have to be listening very, very carefully.
Yeah.
And if I'm not going to get the necessary perspective, which is in fact their perspective, rather than my perspective of how I would feel in that situation.
That's a good answer. I did exactly the opposite of what you just said in your answer. So I have to work on this, because I was listening to respond as opposed to listen to understand. And that's a lot of advice that's out there. And it sounds that when we're listening to respond, it goes back to the very first thing you said in the beginning of the episode, is that I'm still looking at my screen. I'm still looking to how can this relate to me? What can I say to sound smart? What can I do to add to this? It's really an ego issue. And I think, if I understood correctly, it's dialing that ego down and holding space for a place for only your contributions, not thinking about, why am I relevant here?
I think that's very correct. And I think that when we listen, especially as a medical professional, we want to know what the problem is. We want to get that problem solved quite quickly. And so we're thinking, oh, they could do this, they could. And so you may not, in fact, appreciate the totality of the issue that someone is dealing with when they're trying to explain it to you.
Yeah.
And the idea that empathy is something you have to do something about is not quite correct. Empathy is simply gathering perspective. You may do nothing about it, but the more perspective you have, the more accurate that perspective is, the more likely you can do something. So compassion is formulating what you're going to do about your empathic information, and kindness is turning that into an activity.
I think that is the best answer I've heard for a litmus test to understand if we truly have empathy, and a real practical way of dialing up the empathy that we do have. I think everyone at some level is empathetic, but to me, what happens is when we're triggered. And Claire Graves has the hierarchy of the colors of where we are and as in our experiences. And when we drop into the red, when we're really focused on self-preservation or we're triggered or things like that, our empathy dial turns way down because we're no longer seeking to understand. We're seeking to be understood at that point.
Exactly. And I work with couples a lot. And people often say mid-fight, "You're not listening to me." Instead of, "How can I listen to you better?" Yeah. Just saying that would change the texture of their argument.
It is so interesting that you say that, because even for me, I mean, as coaches, that's, as you know, that's something that we have to do, right? Is in order to coach, we have to listen and not, create problems where there aren't any. There's a lot that goes on. Even in that, it changes how you think. I think it makes you a better communicator. But just this morning, I was talking to my husband. We were having coffee outside, and we look over and we see paw prints all over, the dining table outside. And he says to me, I don't know where did this come from? What is this? And I said, "I told you about the raccoon that's living here." And he goes, you never said that. And I was like, and immediately I said, "You're not listening to me." Which is, I said it in jest, and we were laughing about it, but it's so funny, even how quickly we can get to, "You're not listening to me," even when we're not actually angry. We're not feeling the emotions right now, but there's some element of, "I'm not being heard."
Human beings have been on the planet about 300,000 years. We invented language about 50,000 years ago. So that means that for 250,000 years, we were using gestures and facial expression reading and movements to explain the most esoteric emotions and thoughts that we had. Then we invented language, which is a reasonably good way to share information. Then we invented writing and books so that we could actually share that even more effectively. But we still have problems listening. And I think that's why we spend so much time looking at the meta communications, which is people's facial gestures, or if they're saying, "Yes, I agree with you completely," that you're going to go with the no instead of the yes, because we still have that deep history of paying attention to the other things that someone is saying outside of their words.
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating. I didn't know those stats about when language was invented and things like that. But I have to tell you, it did make me feel old because I primarily communicate with grunts still. Right. If you guys might remember Home Improvement with Tim the Toolman Taylor. That's every day for me. So maybe I'm still a little behind. I need to learn some language.
Oh, too funny. Well, Dr. B, you were saying, in a lot of your LinkedIn posts, you do mention that your relationship with empathy, you talk about how that started to sort of become a question for you as a kid. But then even in medicine, tell us, you mentioned talking about the shift from how we practice medicine with the advent of the availability for some prescription medications to alter our experiences, especially around mental health. Can you share a little bit about that and about how you are making empathy a real part of how we practice medicine, why you founded the Empathy Clinic?
Well, I mean, I love being a medical doctor. I love the work that I do, and I enjoy it. I've had a number of burnouts in my career, as many of us had to deal with. But it started for me in medical school. And I remember being a medical student, and you're piling into the room to see a patient who has an illness, and the staff person is holding their file and calling the person by their illness. So this tonsillectomy, make it easy, you got to go examine the patient. And I would look into the eyes of that person, because there was like 15 white coats in the room now, and try to lock eyes and say, "I care. Like, you're a person who's had a tonsillectomy, but I care about you as a person." And I realized that medicine in general was not teaching the idea that this is a person with a condition rather than you are your condition.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize that I may not get a lot of training in med school. So then I said, I'm gonna become a psychiatrist. I'll get training there. And you know what? I'm ashamed to say this. I did not get training in empathy in psychiatry. We talked about it with conditions where there's a lack of empathy, like narcissism. But we didn't talk about it explicitly as how you can amplify your empathic capacities. And a couple of years back, 5 years ago, I put my hand up in a medical conference in Canada and suggested that I could teach an empathy course. The whole room erupted into laughter and said, "You can't teach empathy." Well, if you can teach a wine tasting course or pizza eating course, then why can't you teach an empathy course? It's just amplifying people's appreciation for what that actual skill is. And so I'm still bashing away at that. But to me, that's the sadness about it. And I think that lots of disorders that I see in my office, especially burnout and post-traumatic stress disorder, are actually at some of their core a disorder of empathy. Mm-hmm. And if someone has a traumatic event that they don't think anyone else can understand, and so they keep it to themselves and they get ashamed and they go see a doctor and they says, "Well, you've got these symptoms. Okay, you got PTSD." The essence of that is they don't think anyone can appreciate their story.
Right.
And, for decades now, for nearly 40 years, I've been sitting in my office asking people, "Tell me your story." And that's powerful. It's also healing because now they're not alone with an experience that they felt alone with before.
I think that's really insightful. I have two follow-ups, a two-part follow-up. And it goes to this phenomenon that I've noticed, and you've probably seen television commercials for children in Africa that may be impoverished, and for $1 a day, you can feed a family or something like that, right? And I read a study on this in that as human beings, we are more likely to relate to someone in distress that is near us by proximity than far away, right? So it's difficult for us to put ourselves in the shoe of this child who's hungry or starving in Africa and donate $1. But if it's someone in our neighborhood, we would easily give $100, right? Are all the things that we're talking about where the physician refers to the patient not by name but by their procedure, where the person who doesn't feel like they can be understood, or even where we are not trying to understand the pain someone else is in, are all these variations of the human experience and mechanism, which is either to be significant, where we want to feel that we're significant, so we have PTSD, no one will understand the struggle I am, you can't understand what it's like to be a parent because I don't have a parent. Or a corollary is that if we are empathetic with everything that's going on around us and we try to understand everything around us, there's a dark side to where we're paralyzed and we are unable to function because we've internalized or related to all of the evil or things that we see. The question is, do you feel that these are natural built-in mechanisms in us that are, sort of stems from who we are as human beings?
So I use cave person experience a lot. What was it like to be a cave person?
Yeah.
And I can tell you, if you don't belong to your tribe, you do not survive. Mm-hmm. The essence of humanity is to connect with each other and belong to each other. And let's remember that human beings are one of the few creatures born helpless. We can't stand, we can't feed ourselves. We are 100% dependent on the people around us. And that's one of the reasons why we can stand, is that we need our arms free to hold our young. Right? Most other creatures can hold on to a parent or walk after a parent shortly after birth. Human beings can't do that. The idea of belonging and connecting and being able to have that connection is vital to our sociology and our psychology. Mm-hmm. And so when people feel that they can't connect or they can't connect as much as they would like to, they start to feel like they're not belonging. And that can cause tremendous anxiety and also depression. I've seen it for many, many times.
We're sitting here and we're talking about empathy and the power of listening. Can you speak to really how this plays a role in our experience as members of the South Asian diaspora, whether we're living in Canada or in the States or maybe still have not left home yet and are in still South Asia in various parts.
Well, an interesting micro story is that when I first came to Oakville, we were one of the first mixed families to come into town. And the school called our house, largely because they saw our last name, Bhattacharya, and said, oh, that they're from somewhere else. And they asked us, this is a phone call now. So what language do you speak at home to your children? Expecting my kids to be going to school speaking not English, and another language. And I said to them, this is a bit of me. I said, well, we try to speak the Queen's English to our children. So they realized right away that, I not only do I not have an accent necessarily, but they were making a judgment based on seeing my name. Now, I completely understand, and I'm okay with the call. I'm okay with giving them the answer. But that talks about the judgment, the prejudgment that we still have to deal with. And the other thing is, do you beat your kids? And I said, well, we don't. We try to use confidence and enthusiasm and encouragement, to get my kids to do well in school and to do well in their activities. But this kind of, I guess, stereotype that certain cultures use much harsher techniques and expect their children to turn out in certain ways based on parental expectation rather than the expectation of the individual. Mm-hmm. So for me, if I'm asking someone, so how do you, what do you want to do? What kind of career do you want? I'm interested in what they think they want, what they want to do, rather than to people please or parent please or a community or an organization that might be very far from their true self. Mm-hmm. And the further we are away from our true self, the more we're going to sign up for anxiety and depression, especially existential depression.
I'm trying to imagine what that must have been like for you and for your wife to be on the receiving end of something like that from the kids' school. There could be a number of things that might have run through your head.
Well, I will say this, is that I'm extremely tolerant of momentary misidentification. If it persists, then we have a different conversation that we're going to have.
Sure.
My brother has a beautiful son with blue eyes and ginger hair and white skin. And so during roll call at a new class, beginning of the school year, the teacher mentions his name, last name Bhattacharya, please identify. He puts his hand up. He got sent to the principal's office for being rude, making fun of someone who might have a name like that. So then my brother had to go to the school and quite pleasantly explain to them, this is his name. I am his father. Yes, he doesn't look like he's Asian, but that is his name. And so that misidentification can go the other way as well.
And now I'm thinking about your nephew and what that must be like, right, as a child, depending on how old he was. I guess this is my question here too, because it is so human to want to connect, right? To want to find parallels or similar experiences so that we can connect, so that we can form trust and understand, where am I guess evolutionarily speaking, right? How safe am I in this group, right? Do I belong? What are your suggestions perhaps, or practices to help us really be empathetic? In other words, we're putting ourselves, we're taking our own biases and our own story out of it. And yet at the same time, we have this very understandable and human nature to want to say, you're my people, or maybe you're not, or how do I fit in?
I'm on LinkedIn, and when I started on LinkedIn, I was very, very tentative about what I could get away with. And this is over 2 years ago now. And I took two eggs. I took a brown egg out of my refrigerator and a white egg, and I broke them both. And so the yolks were spilling out on the same plate, and put the shells behind it and took a picture. And I actually said, I'm not sure what I should say about this. And the point was, we're all the same on the inside, even though our shell on the outside might be a different color. Yeah. And that got a big response from people, because I always do this when I'm on an airplane. And this is a bit morbid, but this is me. I look around the airplane and think, if this plane crashes in the Pacific and we end up on a little island, that's the great leveler. No, who's going to be taking charge? Who's going to be helping? Who's going to be kind? Who's going to not be kind? Because you never know how quickly you suddenly need to create a connection to people who might be vital to your existence.
I never thought of it that way, but I'm going to do that next time I'm on a plane. I'm going to be looking around to see who do I need to make friends with.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this. We talk about the school teachers and, the people who are making judgments based on some lens of the world that they have, and they're making biases. But can we be too empathetic? Do we get to a point where we are trying our level best to be understanding, to relate to people, to hold space for them, to have judgment, that it no longer serves us and it's becoming a bit toxic, and especially maybe in relationships where, how do we know when it's time to no longer try to be empathetic, when it's no longer working?
Well, let's not use a door that opens and shuts. Let's use a dimmer switch that we can turn down and we can turn up. So there's actually some science on this done with dentists. So when the dentists are chatting with their client in the chair, they're being empathic. And then when they're about to end freezing, drill, whatever, their empathy dial goes down.
Oh, wow.
And when they're handing the lollipop to the kid later on, the empathy dial goes up again. So we all have, this is actually part of our brain in the caudate nucleus, where we can actually dial down and dial up our empathy. And as you so correctly said, Dinesh, someone who's closer to us, you might have more empathy from someone who's distant to us. So clearly there's a dial that we have that we can increase or decrease. And what we're talking about is some people who their dial is broken, it's on 11, and they can't dial it down again, and they get swamped, and they get full, and they get overwhelmed, and they start to get burnt out, and they get compassion fatigue, they get numb, they can't function, and their only solution is to get away from the situation instead of turning that empathy dial down. And I spend a lot of time with hyper empaths in my practice, saying, do you have an empathy dial? And they say, what's that? And then we talk about, you don't have to be full on empathic 24/7. That will not, it's not sustainable. It's not healthy. And you have to practice, wait for it, self-empathy. If you think of empathy as removing yourself from the screen and entering somebody else's space. So Dinesh, you said putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. That is not empathy. That is you in their shoes. It's how you would think and feel in their situation, not how they think and feel in their situation as them.
Yeah. So
shoes and empathy, no, sorry, wrong. So when you think about yourself, the problem is that we're in ourself all the time. So self-empathy is trying to get out of yourself to look at yourself from a distance. And I do this all the time when I go on a vacation. I get to look at my life back in Canada and say, oh, I could do this and this and this and this. But when I get back in my life, I'm in it now. So it's much harder to get perspective if you're actually inside the experience. And if something terrible happens or something happens, I need to sort it out. It's kind of meditative. Get out of where you're in so you can see it from an outside perspective. And the other thing I try to do is called future self-empathy, which means what would my 10 years from now or 5 years from now self say to me to help me in the situation right now? And you got this. Here's an idea. And that's really powerful because if you survive, you're going to get to that space. And I think that sometimes human beings get very flooded with themselves in the moment, which is presenteeism and paying attention in the moment. That's important. But self-empathy is kind of the opposite. It's looking at yourself from an external perspective. And the other way to do that is to ask somebody else, how do you see me? How do you see this situation? But if you don't have that other person, you can actually use yourself.
First of all, you did not define self-empathy in what my preconceived guess as to how you would have done that. And it was so beautiful and so powerful. Can you talk also, there's self-empathy, and then is it different than self-love?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. We have to realize that love is delusional. Love is a belief that we can't prove. Love is a feeling that you can't really explain to someone if they've never felt love. When your kids say, Mommy, how will I know when I'm in love? Or when do I love something? Well, you love pizza, right? But how do I know if I love someone? And then more complex, how do I know if I love myself? Now, kids are typically born loving themselves until about the age of 11, maybe 12. And if that's a great show on TV, I don't know the name, but of little girls, and they say, "Are you pretty?" "Yes, I'm very pretty." And then they film them when they're 12, 13. "Yeah, I don't like my nose. I don't like my, and I feel so sad when I see that, because self-love requires empathy to be objective about yourself. If you're too swamped with that subjectivity, like I don't like my this, I don't like the color of my skin, whatever the issue is, my hair's straight, I want to be curly, my hair is curly, I want to be straight, you can start to find a myriad of reasons to dislike yourself. Mm-hmm. And loving and liking are not the same thing. Like requires proof. Like, you know why you like things. Love doesn't require proof. That's why it's more ethereal in being able to define it for somebody else, but also especially for yourself. And the better perspective you have on yourself through self-empathy, then that's when I think a true love for self can begin to grow and take place. Mm-hmm. And we can also talk about confidence and self-esteem at some point, but that's very, very closely connected to self-love.
How do you teach self-empathy? If I wanted to teach this to my daughter, who's 3 years old, and she twirls around in her dress and says, "Daddy, look at me, I'm so pretty." How do I teach that when she's 12?
Well, let's go to ballet then. So I did ballet for many years, from about the ages of 9 to 15. And it was pretty serious. It was intense, and it was all girls too, right? So it was kind of cool. But there was a mirror that went from the ceiling to the floor. Yeah. And so if I'm doing a move and you're looking at yourself in the mirror, that mirror became important because when the mirror wasn't there, I had that mirror in my mind. Mm-hmm. And because I had that mirror in my mind, I was able to say, "Oh, I know if my hand position, or if my finger, or if I'm doing something, I move, I can see it because I've developed that capacity to see myself outside of myself." Mm-hmm. So if you have a child, get a mirror and say, "Tell me what you think your face looks like." "I don't know. I don't want my face." And then say, "Well, okay." And then show them, "Oh, that's what my face looks like." And then play another one. Do a smile. Tell me what you think your face looks like. And then by increasing that experience, thank gosh we have emojis, right? We can actually get someone to know what their face looks like. And if I'm doing a session like this with a client and I'm trying to get them to think that I'm not worried about something, this is going to fail. I've got to smooth my face out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I spend a lot of time paying attention to how my face might look to somebody else. That's self-empathy. Mm. Does that help?
Yes, very much so. I need to go buy a mirror now. Yeah, or film them a lot and play the videos back.
Well, that's a great thing. My daughter had a fear of public speaking, and I said, "Here's a iPhone. Film yourself speaking," and she did that. She's an amazing public speaker now. She's sought after, but she believed how other people would see her was catastrophic. But once she actually saw herself and she knew what to improve, then she was the witness. She became her own audience, self-empathy, and was able to manufacture an optimal version of herself, no fear of public speaking anymore.
Mm. That's really, really inspiring.
It's not something that culturally is taught. I don't want to speak for just myself here. And of course, there is an assumption that this is broadly felt. But I think based on conversations with other people and other South Asians, it's safe to say that for many of us, this concept of kindness, of love, of empathy it's just very foreign. It's unfamiliar. We're taught almost the hardness, right? To lead with that hard edge. You touched on this myth that many people have too, which is if I'm empathetic, then I'm soft, or that I'm a jerk if I'm not empathetic, if you're familiar with the concept. And then for those of us who didn't grow up around it, it's like, there's not another way to be. So what would you say to people who are new to this practice, new to maybe considering picking up this little pearl of wisdom that you're offering, but they're a little hesitant?
Well, if you're a leader, or if you're in situations where you're in any kind of group situation, a little empathy goes a long way in building respect. Mm-hmm. And if you take the time, it just 11 seconds to interact with somebody empathically. Ask them a question, listen to what they said, reflect their answer back to them that proves that you understood or at least listen to what they're saying. That builds respect. And respect is the elixir of human connection. We want to be around the people that we respect. We may not love them, we may not like them that much, but we respect them. And community is based on the agreed trustability of connecting to people that you respect. And if we lose that, then we have a paranoid culture where everyone's running around trying to look after their own needs, and the system collapses. So I think the idea of just a tincture of empathy being a very powerful connector of people, and we all want to be respected. It's a basic human need to be respected. Some people need it more than others, but it's a very basic thing. And if you think empathy is kind of a waste of time and you want to be respected, you're actually going to be disrespected. And for me, I think when I talk to people and they kind of really feel they're being taken in, I don't have to say anything because I know that this moment is working for both of us.
So good, Dr. B. I mean, you have shared so many insights on a topic that we almost take for granted a little bit now. You know, you'll read a Harvard Business Review, you'll read somebody that says empathetic leaders are X, Y, or Z, and we know it's something that we need, but never from a perspective that you've shared that actually makes changes. And I think that is the key to what we're trying to do here at the Happy and Human podcast. I think I heard someone sharing the other day, it's on a podcast, about how he never used to floss his teeth. And all it took was an understanding of why daily flossing mattered. And instantly he hasn't missed flossing in like 10 years. So it's always one piece of information, and that's what we're hoping to bring out here. So thank you so much for doing that. We'll ask you a series of questions that are standard across all of our guests. So our first question, if you're ready for it, is, you know, we live in a world of instant gratification. We want it here, we want it now. Related to our conversation or related to anything from your lived experience of your life, tell us something that our listeners, beyond a doubt, can do today to make their lives a little bit better, a little bit happier, a little bit more human, and a little bit more full of joy.
I think everything that has value takes time. It's just stopping to smell a rose takes time. And stopping to investigate the experience of another human being takes time. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, but the value of that moment will be remembered sometimes for the rest of both of those people's lives.
Yeah.
I love that you said it takes time, but it doesn't have to take a lot of time. We think we want immediate, but immediate can be in the form of just a few seconds.
Yep.
So it's
Exactly
so
right.
powerful. So powerful. We also have on the show a game we play called Ask It Forward. So essentially, listeners, if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. Ask It Forward is a really fun way for us to connect our guests together one after another. The guest previous to you, Dr. B, has left a question for you, not knowing who you are, what we were going to talk about, or even when we were going to record. You get to answer that question, and then you get to pay it forward and ask it forward of the next guest. Dr. B, this question comes from the amazing Neha Ruch, who is the creator, founder of this amazing group called Mother Untitled. It's all about supporting women in their journey of motherhood and taking a pause or understanding what motherhood can look like for all of us and respecting that and elevating the experience. So Neha asks, what is the deep work that you are doing?
That's a phenomenally important question. And I think depth goes right down to the center of our soul. Now, when I think of myself, I think of my blood, my flesh, my bones, my social being, my culture. But then I think of the center of my soul. And what is our soul? Our soul is a drop of water in the ocean of life. Mm-hmm. That drop has always been in that ocean and will always be in that ocean. And when I see the relative insignificance and the total significance of that connection, then that deepness can take me to connect to anything or anyone that I choose to. And I can feel comforted by the idea that I have always been.
That was beautiful. So what is then the question that you would like to leave for our next guest?
Okay, I know I'm going to say, what are you going to do to listen better?
Great question.
It's a great question.
I'm not sure I know how to listen better. So give us a tip. What can we do to listen better?
Stop your mind. Just use your ears. As the words come in, do you remember taking notes in school?
Yeah.
You're listening to the teacher and you're taking notes. Just take notes.
Mm-hmm.
And hyper-focus on those words. One thing I do, and this is stressful, is I pretend the person's going to suddenly stop speaking and say, what was I just saying? And I've done that with people. I say, what was I just saying? You should hear the stuff that comes up. There wasn't anything close to what I was saying. But, and I'm not judging. But I think when you have that idea, like just say they stop and say, what was I saying? If you know, you're going to win so many points. If you don't know, you're going to lose respect.
Yeah.
So powerful. Even especially in this day and age, we're always trying to multitask. I'll take responsibility and hold accountability for when I've done that. Just this morning, even I was preparing to, get ready and come on and hit record with the two of you. And my daughter Monsi wanted to make pancakes, and she was asking me something, and I was checking I happened to be looking at my phone when she started speaking. She said, "Mommy," and I said, "Yeah, beta," and I'm scrolling, right, because I was looking for something. And in that moment, maybe the next time I can put my phone down and look at her and model how I want to be listened to, so that she might pick up on that and model that too for herself. She deserves to be listened to, just like the other person, whoever it is. We all deserve that moment, that eye contact.
So we have central vision and we have peripheral vision to the sides. We don't want to miss people who are only really paying attention to them in our peripheral vision. And we need to be focused on. And you can tell when if I'm speaking to someone in a restaurant and they're looking all around the room, we're going to have a conversation about, are they here? Is this a convenient time to talk? And if not, let's make a space and time where we can actually focus on each other. Because what I want to discuss with you is important, or what you're saying to me is important. I don't want to miss any of it.
Dr. B, there's no way we can adequately thank you for spending your time with us. But in our way, a mug will do. No, but in our way, we try to say thanks to you by giving you the opportunity to share an organization that's near and dear to your heart. And by sharing it with our audience, we'll hopefully uplift and raise awareness around that organization. And in your name, on behalf of you, Seema and I will make a contribution to the organization. Perhaps in some small way, people that don't even know that the podcast exists will benefit from the time that you have so graciously shared with us today.
My mom passed away from breast cancer in 1990. She was only 56. So I always make contributions to cancer research. Always. One day we're going to beat it.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that.